Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode. Day late, but I know some of you are tracking me so heavy. But yeah, it's the end of June, and next month we'll see how it goes. I'm leaving the country, so I'll try to get some videos pre-recorded, and I think one of the days I'm uploading is going to be like the beginning of a long flight pattern to Africa with like 4 flights. So hopefully it'll upload in between flights at layovers. Well, thank you for tuning in. I have a new book, but it's not a new book to me. I read it, but it's Harvest Glory by Ruth Ward Heflin. Maybe I should pose it like this. But anyways, if you don't know me that well, maybe you just know me from online, then you would know that Ruth Ward Heflin is a big hero of mine. She embodies just obedience and saying yes to God when it's hard. A lot of beautiful insight in her writings about worship and on also testimonies of going to the nations, which love both of those things all wrapped up in Jesus. And so she has quite a few books. I don't know if you can see, but I have all of her books but one. I'm gonna get them, but they all have the word glory in them. And maybe I'll do like a review of all these one day, like maybe a series. I still have to get the last one, and I haven't read all of these yet. Excuse me as I struggle to put them back. But yes, but this one, Harvest Glory, by far you can see is the thickest. And while each of them have kind of a different subject matter, like the one, they all have something glory in front of them, but one is just called Glory. That one is all about worship. I've read that one more than once and I love it. I could go for reading again, but maybe I'll save it for the series that I'll do eventually. But Harvest Glory, I want to start off because it's more biographical in nature than the other ones, which is a lot of what I love to talk about. Most is like the history and the testimonies, and this one is all about the harvest, is all about nations. And her life was wild. She was just obedient, let's just say that. As you can see, like I said, it's a thick book, but like I'm not going to go through all the stories. We'd be here forever. That's the point of this book, is so you can read it. But it's got some cool pictures too. That's her praying places. That's her with family members, different nations. But yeah, so if you don't know Ruth Ward Heflin, I forget when she exactly was born, but maybe it might have been the 1940s. But she passed away, unfortunately, in 2001. She is from Virginia, a place about 20 minutes north of Richmond, Virginia, to where her family still has campgrounds today where they do services over the summer, which I got to go to a few years ago, or 2 years ago maybe. But yeah, this story is more about her story as a missionary, most of all. And so, yeah, I'm going to, like I said, recount a few stories, but from the beginning, she always had like a draw to China and kind of got words. People one time told her, "You look Chinese," to her. She doesn't, but someone told her enough, and that just was a confirmation for maybe I should move there. And it was from a young age, like since she was a little girl. So by the time that she turned 18 and got independence, she was ready to go. And so she raised a little money and took off. And back then it wasn't like the time of commercial flights. That wasn't really a thing yet. And so she took a freight boat, and it took her, I think, 40 days to get there, I want to say, from Virginia all the way to Hong Kong is where she resided. And she had some stops. I think they might have gone to Australia and the Philippines. They had some pit stops on the way, and so she had some cool testimonies there. But really, she went there to Hong Kong, and it was like the beginning days of her ministry, and she would come back for the summer to raise more funds. And eventually, commercial flights caught up, so it became a lot easier for her to go back and for her family. But the cost of it back then, when it wasn't just so simple, like it wasn't within 24 to 48 hours or less, to just see someone from across the country. There still is a cost financially today, but it's just 40 days, like, oof. Just, and then the fact that she went back to see her family every summer was pretty wild too. But yeah, she became a missionary there. She learned a lot about unity. She really struggled with the language, which I get, because Chinese, I'm trying to learn some languages right now, but Chinese is a little intimidating because it's a tonal language. Like, so the same sound will have 8 tones, which change the meaning. And so she was not hearing the difference, but one day God supernaturally just clicked the light bulb and it all made sense. But yeah, during those early years, she also, I think, was engaged, but God had her break it off, and he said, will you just give the rest of your life to me? So she ended up being single the rest of her life because God asked her to give it up, which is just also a big cost. When God asks it from you and you're laying down alive. So I think because of her yes and her willingness, even when it was hard, because she recounts these stories not as like easy things, like, oh yeah, I just did this. Like, she talked about the hardship, and that's what I find a lot in missionary stories is you hear about the hardship. Like, I haven't read the journal of David Brenner, which I talked about recently in the previous video, but a lot of his journal talked about the hardship. So we get that too, but I want to get into 2 of my favorite stories, and one's more lengthy because it connects to a lot of her life. But the first one is Nepal. God basically told her, go to Nepal and meet this like prince. And so that's what she does, is she heads to Nepal. It was a time at that point where she could fly, but it is, I think, one of the craziest places you can fly into in the world, just because of the mountains and the length of the airstrip and everything. So she goes there, she makes her way, and even on the plane, she meets basically an ambassador and just hits it off with him. She has no idea it's an ambassador, but he basically invites her. He's like, hey, you know what? Come to this like event tonight. And she goes, and it's like a one by the royal family. Well, the prince that God told her to meet was not there, but his whole family was there. And so she ended up hitting off with this ambassador and hitting it off with one of the members of the family. And she was going there thinking like, oh, it's just going to be a few days. And no, I think she was there for 6 weeks. And by the time that the prince came back, she had met the rest of the royal family, and she like preached the gospel to them and loved on them. And not all of them, fully accepted or embraced it, but some of them had begun to or be swayed to the ways of Jesus and just loving him. And so it was just crazy because I think she went in going like, oh yeah, I'll meet him right away and I'll leave. It'll be like a weekend trip. But no, she stubbornly, in faith, stayed until she met him. And so I don't think she had like the full funds to be there for 6 weeks, but God ended up providing and like making a way. And she just had a lot of favor on the assignment. And there's definitely more details to that story that I haven't got into, but I just love that it just speaks to me just about like, nope, God said this, I'm sticking with it. Because it's like, for me, I would just be like, oh, it's going to be a weekend. And because of my perceived preconception, like, God didn't say it's going to be a weekend, but my brain would go there. And then after 3 days, I'm like, God, where are you? You told me I would meet him, and I'm just trying to obey you. And but no, she stuck with it and just followed the path. And it was crazy because she was thinking she's going to meet this one member of their royal family, and she meets basically all of them. So yeah, God didn't tell her that, but that was part of the journey that he had for her. And so it just taught me just about being like sticking it with the faith, to be faithful to the assignment God gave, and also just not to let like my preconceived notions of what it looks like to actually get it in my way, because it was much better and grander than she even imagined. And so yeah, those are some lessons I learned from there. Another one that really got me is they were on a trip to South America, and it was her and 3 other ladies, and they were just on a prayer trip. God would had them go places just to pray. They would fly just to Brazil to pray. And sometimes they just did that and just had faith that the prayers worked, or God wouldn't ask them to go there if it wasn't. But it was a night where they're all going to bed, and one of the women started talking. She started saying like this like nursery rhyme rhythm, but she was naming cities in the world, and they're like, "What are you saying?" It was in the middle of the night, and they're like, "Why do you keep repeating this?" And they realized she was asleep and talking in her sleep. But so they wrote down what she was saying, and it was like this like little poem about going to different cities and what's in different cities. And so they're like, "This must be God." Like, she's not awake, and she doesn't. They asked her in the morning, like, "Do you know these cities?" And like, she didn't know. So, basically, they went back to Virginia, and they went to their people and said, "Hey, we're fundraising to go to these cities." And she looked it up, and this again was later in her life, so there's flying. She looked it up, and she could find like a route that was about $1,200, which today it feels like a normal ask for some international flights. But back then, to 5 different cities, I think that was a lot. And so um, she found the best path, but it was not the path that was written in the poem. And so she was like, should I follow this path that's cheaper, or should I go the way that God said? And so she prayed about it and just felt like God should say I should go the way that this poem says. And they looked it up, and it was $5,000. And she was like, "Okay, well, God, do you want to do this?" And then someone came to the campgrounds, because she would come back every summer to fundraise and to preach, because they would do these revival meetings, and so she was always ministering in those in the summer. And yeah, someone came and gave her all the money she needed and her team needed to go. And so they flew to each of these locations, and nothing like spectacular happened. But the weird thing that happened, and they were very diverse countries. It was Europe to Ethiopia, like to like Russia. I forget the 5. I know Ethiopia was one of them, but like she went to the 5 different locations, and the first person that she met and connected with in each of these nations was Jewish. And so like she was like, "What is this? Why does God keep bringing me up to Jewish people? I keep meeting Jewish people in all these different nations." And so God spoke to her about like the Jewish diaspora, like they're spread out, and they just recently become a nation again, and they're spread out. And she felt an assignment from the Lord to be a missionary to Israel. So she was leaving Hong Kong to go be a missionary to Israel, and she felt part of her assignment was to bring Jews back to Israel from being spread out. And so she went back into her campgrounds and said, "Hey, I feel this from the Lord." They blessed her out, but then like 30 people moved with her. I actually had the privilege of meeting one of the first people that moved out there with her. Actually, she moved a little bit before Ruth and scouted out the land, and I got to go to the first church that they got to meet in Jerusalem this past fall. So it was really exciting to see, like, not only like in Jerusalem you see all the history of Jesus, but even just the history of what they did there and their missions work, and go to a place where they used to worship, and which also happened to be the place where they said that Peter denied Jesus. As they say, that's the historical location. So to even see that place become a place of worship is also really cool too. And so yeah, I got to go there and see that and see where they moved. But when she was there, she moved and ministered to the Jews. They learned about worship, and she just learned to love the people of Israel and the Jewish people, and even help bridge divides that are presently there even now. But one cool story in that assignment is one time she went to Russia, and she went, and God told her to like eat at this one place, and it was USSR. It wasn't really Russia right then. It was USSR at that time. And so she went there, and they had a restaurant, and there was flags at each table. And so it was like, since she's American, even though she lived in Israel, they would put an American flag in front of her. And they did that so that certain nations wouldn't intermingle. They didn't want them to intermingle and get ideas from an American or something like that. So they put flags on the table so they could control just who communicates with who. But she gets there, and they only had one seat open, and it was at a 2-seat table, and someone was sitting there who happened to be Russian. They're like, hey, this is the only seat available. Normally we would sit you with a Russian, I think, but like we came with this guy. So she sat with him, and then like they got to know each other, and he actually ended up being in charge of like immigration and things like that in the government. And she was just like, oh, so are you able to release Russian Jews back to Israel? And he was like, yeah, I would be able to do that. And she's like, okay, you're going to do that in the name of the Lord. And he was like, why would I do that? And she's like, because God wants it done. And he's like, okay. And then he's like, okay, I'll do it. And so it just like, he was like, that's enough convincing I need, basically. And so basically he signed something that like gave opportunity for Jews in Russia or USSR at the time to immigrate back, and like just crazy stuff. God said, fly there, go to this restaurant, and she did, and then that thing happened. And so she has just these wild stories, and like I told you, like 2.5 stories, like and there's literally a list of all the nations that she went to and is in this book. Like this whole page is nations. So I don't know how many. There's 196 nations currently, and that's not including like territories. And so I don't even know how many of these. I think some of these are territories in this list, but yeah, she lived a wild life filled with amazing testimonies of just obedience from God, hearing the Lord and obeying and risking it when she didn't have she lived as a missionary. So she didn't have the funds to be flying like she did all the time. She'd just show up to the airport without the funds, and then someone would just be waiting for her with the money. Like crazy stuff. But she just obeyed and trusted God. If you said this, then I'm doing it. And so it's just a life of faith that just astounds me and challenges me with some of the things that God's been asking me. And so, yeah, I'm just grateful for her testimonies. Like I used to get words from the Lord and prophetic words from other people that never made sense to me, and I would always try to have a grid for it. And when I read this book and the book Glory by her that doesn't have any word before it, it just changed me, because I was like, this is what these words mean. This is the grid, outside the life of Jesus. Like this is the grid, like that's possible. And so I'm just grateful. So I highly recommend this book. It is kind of hard to find. At the campgrounds, they sell it. So if you go to their website, you should be able to find it. I know some of her books are free in PDF form, even. On their website, if you just look at Ashland Campgrounds, Ruth Ward Heflin, you could find their website. And some of them are free on PDF. And you can find it there. It's kind of, this book compared to the others is thicker and so a little bit pricier. But if you go to like Amazon and stuff like that, it's really hard to find. So I do recommend reading it if you have read it. Yeah, comment below. Let me know all the cool stories that you love and hit your heart that I may not have mentioned, or if some of my favorites are your favorite too. Let me know. But I love, just being able to discuss with people the books I've read. So if you've read it and you have points that you want to make and share, please share. And yeah, subscribe if you have not subscribed, if you want more content like this. Like the video if you want to like the video and support. And if you subscribed and you haven't got notifications, it's because there is a bell down below that probably has a dash through it. You hit that bell and then you'll get notified when a new video uploads. Some people have been asking me about that, like, I subscribe, but I don't get told. It's the bell. So hit that and then you'll be told. But thank you guys so much for watching, and yeah, please feel free to discuss it with me. I love this stuff. God bless.